The fire started just after sunset. Ava James had been inside her small pine wood cabin, the only home she had left after her husband passed 2 winters ago. She was mending an old quilt when the smell of smoke crept under the door. By the time she ran outside, flames were already licking up the side wall near the stove. She tried throwing snow on the fire, screaming for help, but out there on the edge of the Wyoming range, no one lived close enough to hear. The wind howled through the trees, feeding the blaze. Within minutes, her cabin, everything she'd built since her husband's death, was swallowed in firelight. Ava fell to her knees in the snow, helpless, her breath turning to white clouds of despair. Then came the sound of hooves. A rider emerged through the smoke and drifting snow. A tall man in a worn brown duster and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His horse stamped nervously, but the man's eyes stayed calm, steady on the fire. He dismounted, grabbed the water barrel from his saddle, and began throwing it over the flames. It didn't help much, but he didn't stop. When the fire finally burned itself down to black smoke and embers, the man stood still, breathing hard. Ava coughed, her hands trembling. "It's gone," she whispered. "Everything's gone." The cowboy looked at her for a long moment, the orange glow of the embers reflecting in his dark eyes. Then, without a word, he turned toward his horse, unstrapped an axe and a coil of rope, and started walking toward the tree line. Ava blinked. "Wait, what are you doing?" He didn't answer. Instead, he began cutting by moonlight. The sound of his axe echoed through the valley. Thud, crack, thud, crack. Every time she tried to speak, to tell him it was pointless, that she could rebuild in the spring, he just kept working, silent, focused. Ava gathered what few things she'd saved. Her husband's pocket watch, a scorched photograph, a tin cup. She watched him drag the first logs to where her cabin had been, stacking them with the precision of a man who'd done this before. "Stranger," she finally said, "you don't even know me." He stopped for just a heartbeat. His breath came out in a mist. Then he nodded once, just enough for her to know he'd heard, and went back to work. Ava wanted to be angry. She wanted to tell him to stop wasting his time, but she couldn't. There was something steadying in his presence, something that told her she wasn't as alone as she thought. So she helped. She fetched nails from the half-burned toolbox, held boards while he hammered, carried wood to the side. He said nothing all night, not even when she stumbled or cried quietly. Only once did he pause, when he saw her hands bleeding from splinters. Without a word, he reached into his coat, pulled out a clean handkerchief, and wrapped it around her palm. His touch was gentle, sure. Then he went back to work. By dawn, smoke no longer rose from the ashes. Instead, a rough but standing frame took shape, walls of fresh pine, a small roof patched with tarps and blankets, enough to keep her safe from the cold. Ava stood back, blinking through her tears. "You built this," she whispered. In one night, the cowboy didn't look up. He was fixing the door frame, shoulders squared, snowflakes melting on his hat brim. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep and quiet. "You needed a roof." That was all. Ava felt her throat tighten. "Why? Why would you do all this for me?" He looked at her then, really looked, his eyes tired but kind. "Because once, somebody did it for me." He didn't say more. They stood in silence as the sun rose, turning the snow gold. Ava offered him coffee, the only thing she could make, and they sat on the step of the new cabin. The smell of burned pine hung heavy, but the light felt softer now, warmer. "My husband built the first one," she said after a while. "Said it lasts forever. Guess nothing really does." The cowboy nodded. "Forever ain't in the wood. It's in the hands that build again." Ava smiled faintly, touched by his simple wisdom. "You talk like a preacher." He chuckled, but for a sound close to laughter she'd heard all night. More like a man who's learned the hard way. She learned his name only after the second day. Luke Carter. He stayed longer than she expected, saying he just wanted to make sure the roof held through the next storm. Ava tried to pay him with what little she had, a jar of honey, her last pair of gloves, but he refused every time. Instead, he fixed the broken fence, cleared the snow path, even repaired the old well pump. Each evening, they'd sit by the fire, the new one, small and safe, and she'd tell him stories of her late husband, of the land, of the hard winters. Luke listened quietly, his face unreadable, but his eyes full of understanding. Once, she asked, "Do you ever talk about yourself?" He looked into the fire. "Not much to tell." "Then maybe you just don't have anyone who asks." He smiled at that, a soft, grateful kind of smile that made her heart stir in a way it hadn't in years. One evening, a storm rolled in, heavy snow, the kind that howls against the windows. The wind shook the cabin, but this time it stood firm. Luke was by the fire, sharpening his knife. Ava was mending a torn sleeve. "You'll be leaving soon," she said quietly. He didn't look up. "Guess I will. Do you have a home to go to?" He paused for a long time. "Had one once. Burned down." Ava's hands froze. He finally looked up, meeting her gaze. "My wife was inside." The silence that followed was deep enough to feel. Ava swallowed hard. "That's why you stayed? Why you rebuilt mine?" Luke nodded slowly. "Couldn't save hers. Figured maybe I could still save something." Ava's eyes glistened. "You did?" After the storm passed, Luke saddled his horse. Ava walked him to the gate, her breath clouding the morning air. "You've got a good place here now," he said. "Don't let it burn again." She smiled through tears. "Not if I can help it." He turned to mount, but she reached out, touching his arm. "Luke, thank you for everything." He tipped his hat. "You already did when you smiled again." Then he rode off. Leaving a trail of hoof prints through the snow. Spring came slowly. Ava planted new flowers by the door, painted the cabin white, and carved 2 initials into the porch rail. Not her late husband's this time, but A and O. Not as a promise, but as gratitude. She never saw Luke Carter again that season. But one morning, months later, she found a small wooden carving left by the gate, a miniature cabin, carefully whittled, with the words still standing carved underneath. Ava pressed it to her heart, tears spilling freely. She looked up at the wide Wyoming sky, the same color as his eyes, and whispered, "Thank you, Cowboy." Moral of the story: sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest kind of kindness. You don't need to say much to heal someone. Sometimes you just have to show up, stay a while, and build what was lost.